Canadians know that we live by the rule of law. And the legal system is doing what it's intended to do in a situation such as this. There has been absolutely no political interference, and there shouldn't be. We have a sophisticated relationship with the Chinese that dates back decades and will continue.
The federal government is facing tough questions over what the future of Canada-China relations could look like. That's following the arrest of a high-profile Chinese tech executive in Canada. Huawei's chief financial officer, Meng Wanzhou, was arrested in Vancouver on December 1st. The U.S. is seeking her extradition, alleging that Meng was involved in violating U.S. sanctions on Iran. But China isn't backing down. Over the weekend, Canada's ambassador to China, John McCallum, was warned by Chinese officials of grave consequences should Meng not be released. So what could those consequences look like? Is there any way to resolve this situation? Brian Kingston is the Vice President of Policy for the Business Council of Canada, and he joins me now. Hi, Brian. Nice to see you again.
Good to see you.
So when we hear this phrase, grave consequences, when you hear that phrase, what are you thinking the possibilities are?
Well, really, the options for China are limitless, and that's what's very concerning around what's going on right now. All you have to do is look at past examples of what China has done in similar disputes. So recently, for example, South Korea decided to permit the installation of the THAAD missile defense system on the peninsula. China responded quite aggressively and banned the sale of tour group packages to South Korea. That had a significant impact on the South Korean economy and reportedly cost $5 billion US. Back in 2010, Norway faced a similar situation where they gave the Nobel Peace Prize to Liu Xiaobo. The response from China was swift. They put on hold FTA talks, which were just starting to get underway. And then they banned the import of Norwegian salmon, basing it on a claim that there was a virus in the Norwegian salmon. Norway watched its exports fall literally right through the floor. That's been removed recently, and their exports have been restored, but very nasty and very damaging for the economy. So, we're worried that we could be going down that path.
When the analysis is sort of being done, what are some of Canada's vulnerabilities? And it's interesting you mentioned the tourist example, because I was just at a conference where a number of people from the tourism industry were talking about the advances made with China, the agreements that have been forged recently, the uptick in Chinese tourists to Canada. Is that, for example, somewhere where Canada's vulnerable? Yeah,
it absolutely is. And yeah, as you know, Minister Jolie just released today a report around the Canadian tourism industry and ways we could improve it going forward. And China is obviously a really great market for Canada, attracting more Chinese tourists here. So that's worrisome. Other areas that you could look at are just, what are some of Canada's major exports into the Chinese market, and could those be targeted? Coal, canola, you name it, a number of our resources. Now, I hope it doesn't get to that point. We're both mature countries. We should be able to have disputes at a political level while still moving forward with economic discussions that are of mutual interest. So our hope is that we never get to that point.
And it's interesting, we were talking in the break just about the sort of changing world dynamic and how under circumstances in the past we might have expected, since essentially we're caught in the middle here. This is not really our doing. This is to be someone to be extradited to the U.S. that you would have expected the U.S. to come to, I don't know if our aid is the right phrase, but at least have our back in more colloquial terms. But it's different this time.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing good about this situation for Canada, unfortunately. We had no choice but to do this. This is a U.S. extradition request, and it was the right thing to do. But very unfortunate that we're now caught between two global powers who are engaged in their own dispute right now. We really can't win. The Chinese want to punish Canada, despite the fact that they should be directing their anger towards the U.S., and it's not guaranteed that the U.S. will have our back on this. So we couldn't be in a worse situation, and it's extremely unfortunate.
Is there anything that Canada can do to mitigate that? I mean, once the decision is made, for example, on bail, or obviously the legal process has to play out, but is there something, or do you imagine there is something being done behind the scenes politically to assuage concerns?
Yeah, I think our government is doing a good job of that right now. Minister Freeland spoke earlier today and indicated that she's communicated a message through to her counterpart in China. At every level of government, I hope that message is being communicated, which is this is something that we had to do. We have an extradition treaty with the U.S. There will be every bit of due process given in this whole process. And it's not something that should damage the Canada-China relationship.
What is the state, from your perspective, from the business perspective, of the Canada-China relationship? Because it's not in isolation. It's not even just about this one event. We've talked about many times, for example, the chapter in the USMCA that referenced, not moving forward with a formal free trade agreement and having to notify the U.S. and what that would trigger. I mean, there's a huge trade war going on right now with the U.S. that's impacting markets every day. What is the state of Canada-China relations as far as business is concerned?
Yeah, well, the relationship over the years has gone through many ups and downs, and it's been frustrating to watch, particularly from the business community who want to see progress made. Right now, we're in a very challenging situation where we have Section 3210, which restricts our ability to move forward with an FTA, and then you add on to it this situation. So, I worry that the good progress that was made by the government recently at the Economic and Financial Dialogue in Beijing, I worry that may be put on hold now as this gets dealt with. But ultimately, our message has been we can have political disputes, we can have disputes around security, but that does not mean that we can't still advance a mutually beneficial commercial engagement that's a benefit to all Canadians. You can't have an export diversification strategy without the second largest global economy involved in it. So, this is a difficult position for us.
Yeah, how hard is it though? Because I think for a lot of us who read what's going on in China, we read about, JP was mentioning the people in prison, the Muslims imprisoned and in re-education camps, and we know China's human rights record, and it's a constant discussion. I mean, that's part of what's being, led to the up and down in the relationship. How difficult is it to forge ahead, and from a business perspective, like when there's constantly the ups and the downs of the political aspect of the relationship?
Yeah, I think the government's done a decent job of this over the years. Basically, you can advance the economic discussions, and you can still raise issues with human rights, and you can still raise issues with cybersecurity. It doesn't mean that, if you have an issue that you suddenly have to close off those other discussions. That's the way it works with China, and some countries have been very successful. Just look at Germany and the UK, who've engaged with China consistently over the years, despite having disputes. So it can be done, and a mature country should be able to move forward and have those discussions despite real challenging bilateral issues that will continue.
The former head, John Manley, the former finance minister, foreign affairs minister, but he also used to head up the business council. He once told me that the big problem was that a specific policy had never been articulated by the government. Do you share that view? And not just this one, previous ones as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I can see why the Chinese would be frustrated with Canada, because they wonder what does Canada ultimately want in its relationship with China, and we haven't really seen that articulated. I don't think the government does. I can tell you from the business community perspective, we would like to see a consistent economic engagement strategy that ultimately leads to the reduction of trade barriers, investment barriers, so that Canadian companies can benefit in the growing Chinese market. We have not seen a clear strategy articulated by numerous governments, and that's been to the detriment of Canadians.
A lot to watch in this story. Thank you so much, Brian.
Thank you.
That's Brian Kingston. The president of France promised to speed up tax